Hi everybody, it's Josh. I'm doing a review of the fifth part of day 3, which was on the daily interactions realm of changing students' mindsets. And so this was from October 3rd. So in the Skillful Teacher on page 276, they reference 10, they call it arenas. We changed the word to opportunities, but they're times where in daily interactions a teacher can send high expectations messages. Although there were 10 different ones that they described, we really wanted to focus on the first 3. In August, we actually started with number 2 and 3. We talked about a strategy called no opt-out, and it's what happens when a student says, I don't know, or otherwise gets an answer wrong, and we talked about different ways that teachers can use the technique of no opt-out to hold students accountable and to send the message that you believe that all students can achieve at high levels. What we had left out was number 1, which is how to call on students in a way that sends that high expectations message. So we're going to focus on that today. First, we asked the participants to reflect on their own experiences as students with what we call cold calling, which is when you're called on without volunteering, and under what circumstances do they cold call, how do they feel about it, and how do they think students feel about it. I then asked teachers to do what's called a word splash, which is just pick one word or phrase that summarizes the feelings, and if it was a positive feeling, they put it on one board, and if it was a negative feeling, they put it on the other. And the words that came out of this were things, for the negative were things like terror, anxiety, fear, picked on, freezing, embarrassed, and then on the positive side, accountability was the word that came up over and over again, or engagement, or high expectations, or equity of voice. So you can see there's definitely a diversity of views. Then when we got into it, we talked about the history of it. Most people think of cold calling in a pretty negative way because of the way that they experienced it. Also in pop culture, for instance, in Fast Times at Ridgemont High, Mr. Hand has some famous cold calling on Mr. Spicoli where he's clearly trying to humiliate him. And for the younger teachers, or the young at heart of us, Harry Potter has some pretty famous cold calling incidents, including this one, which I'll show right now.
Mr. Potter, our new celebrity. Tell me, what would I get if I added powdered root of asphodel to an infusion of wormwood? You don't know? Well, let's try again. Where, Mr. Potter, would you look if I asked you to find prudent to first teach the students to block unfriendly spells, Professor?
So I think you get the point from that one. But clearly Snape's in this situation was not holding high expectations for Harry. He was trying to humiliate him. Chelsea Crawford, who originally designed this session, when she Googled images for cold calling, this is one that came up, which we think is quite appropriate for pop culture. So clearly, as part of Skillful Teacher, we're not hoping that you use cold call to call on unprepared students so that you can stab them in the face and feast upon their blood. And instead, we think we want to kind of revisit cold calling in a different light. And the way that we do that is, first of all, we go back to the concept of all means all. And as a mentor team, when we go into classrooms, a lot of times what we're doing is we're looking for what kind of interactions are happening and what are the patterns of interactions. Some teachers ask us to use a template like this to kind of focus on who's raising their hand the most and in what ways they're participating. But really sometimes what we want to look at is all of the students and think about the idea of equity of voice, and this picture, which actually comes from a movie, I think really sums it up a lot. If you look at everybody in the room, there's so much going on here, from this kid who's like having some sort of a private moment with somebody else, probably the kids in the back that are talking, these girls who are participating and ready to answer, and this girl, the way that she's looking at the camera, the way you think about what she's thinking in that room and whether or not her voice is being heard. So the reasons why we think cold calling is so important is it can maximize engagement. It's a really, really effective way of systematically checking for understanding. If a teacher lets kids who raise their hand answer questions, then they're probably going to get them right. And kids who don't understand might just keep their hands down. It also, from the movie Ferris Bueller's Day Off, the Bueller is kind of the epitomization of the slow pace of a class where kids get really, really bored because the teacher's waiting for volunteers. So it increases the perceived pace, but also the actual pace of class. And finally, it distributes the cognitive work, and it holds students across the continuum accountable for doing high work. Not sure why I said finally, because the final thing is it sends high expectations for all students. So how to do cold call? It's really important when you cold call that you ask the question first rather than say the name first, because the point of it is to ask a question, and in this wait time, every single student is wondering if they're going to be called on, and so they're starting to formulate an answer, and then you name the student at the very end. And so that time in number 2, in the wait time, you're actually getting engagement by a huge diversity of students. And then you can repeat over and over again, either using random selection or seemingly random selection. In the book, Teach Like a Champion, where cold calling is outlined, it talks about some essential elements and the pitfalls that are involved in if you don't do that. So it should be predictable. If it's not, you're surprising students and they're reacting. It also shouldn't be personal, and it shouldn't be punitive. And so it needs to be systematic, where it's universal and all students think that they could be called on. Really good cold calling is upbeat and positive. You're asking questions expecting students to get the answer. It's not to do the gotcha. And it should be planned. If you do it off the cuff and it's unplanned, you likely won't have the right level of challenge for the students, and so you want to kind of unbundle it and make sure that you're asking questions in appropriate order, getting more and more sophisticated and complicated. And then finally, it should be focused on curricular substance. You cannot use cold calling as a discipline tactic or a classroom management strategy and also use it as an engagement strategy. So if you do the "what did I just say?" and then you call on somebody, then they are expecting that you're doing it for negative reasons. So you always need to be doing it in a way that students are expecting. They know that you're doing it because you expect them to get the right answer. Interestingly, in this session, I talked about cold calling not being the same as equity sticks, and that really we believed that strategic cold calling, where you're calling on students specifically, was better than equity sticks because you could match the level of rigor of the question with where you think the students were. One of the participants questioned that and said, well, if we have high expectations for all, why shouldn't we do it randomly? Because really, if we have high expectations, then we shouldn't depend on our own judgment for knowing who might answer the right question. That conversation flipped me. I previously had believed that sticks weren't really a great strategy, and I changed my mind based on the conversation that we had in that session, and now believe that really starting with equity sticks is probably the best way, because we really can't trust ourselves to know the right level, and if we are not calling on specific students because we don't think that they can do it, we don't have high expectations for all. So I think equity sticks are a great way of cold calling, but you can also do it strategically, or you can pretend to use equity sticks or do other things like that. After this, we showed some videos, and I think this is in the next video, so I'm going to end this one now, and you can go on to number 6 to watch the videos that we showed in the session.